Um, Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the second edition of the Gateway of India Geoeconomic Dialogue. A few house rules before we start. Please switch off your cell phones. There will be moderator envoys who will be wandering around, who will be in your midst. Elvira, and Kunal is a very tall person at the back, and Elvira is, please, you have a notepad and pencil on your tables. If you have a question, please write it down, write your name, your organization, and Elvira and Kunal will take it from you. We have this evening, we're going to start our conversation with our wonderful and excellent Foreign Secretary, S. Jaishankar, and an eminent strategist, Dr. C. Raja Mohan, both of whom have been great friends to Gateway House, and of course, Dr. Jaishankar is a co-sponsor of this event. We will start the session right away. They will speak for about half an hour, and then they'll break for question and answers. The session is, of course, very timely. It is political changes and economic uncertainty.
Thank you, Manjeet, and let me join her in welcoming all of you for day 2 of the Geoeconomic Dialogue. I must also thank the Gateway House for giving me this opportunity to have this conversation with Dr. Jaishankar, the Foreign Secretary of India. I also want to thank you, Foreign Secretary, for expanding the engagement in the recent years between the Foreign Office and the various other stakeholders. I don't want to say foreign policy is too important to be left to diplomats alone, but the kind of consequences today to the business, to the scientific community, the whole range of stakeholders in the country who begin to be affected because India's own integration with the world has changed. So therefore, we really welcome that opportunity to engage more with the Foreign Office. But if I might start with one question, which is that in the last 25 years, I mean, going back to 1989, 91, much of your work, much of the Foreign Office's work has been to deal with a big disruption that took place in 89 to 91. There was a geopolitical disruption in terms of the collapse of the Soviet Union, the end of the Cold War, and the range of consequences that followed. Probably even more significant was the geoeconomic shift that took place in terms of the dominance of the so-called Washington Consensus and a new imperative on all of us to reform, to liberalize, to globalize. So much of your work, I mean, in the last 25 years has been really to cope with these two big shifts that have taken place. How well we have done, you think, and how do we deal with the new disruption? Now, the Washington Consensus quite clearly has broken down. There are a whole new set of imperatives that are looking at us. So how do you see this general situation and whether our system is ready and prepared to deal with this second disruption that is beginning to unfold?
Thank you, Raj. First of all, let me also add my words of welcome. It's good to be here. And I think Raj said what he had to after saying he didn't want to say it, which was that it's something which should, foreign policy is something which we need to take beyond diplomats. And I think part of the purpose of partnering with Gateway House is really to take the conversation out of Delhi into larger circles, into larger subjects. Considering we define it partly as geoeconomic, itself is an indication that we are prepared to view it very differently. Let me respond to your first issue. I mean, it's interesting. I started my career in what was then the Soviet Union. And for those who went through the Soviet Union, what happened in 1991 in many ways was unimaginable when it happened. Since then, we have been brought to assume that while other countries waxed and waned, somewhere that there was an immutability about American power. I think to some extent that proposition today is under test. You can, there's still a view that American power was overextended or that the US has a unique ability to reinvent itself, all of which may be true. But I think when we look today at the global scenario, we shouldn't look at it just in terms of what happened last year, Brexit or the election of Donald Trump. I think it's an accumulation of a series of developments, whether it's the 2008-9 crisis and its consequences, the rise of China, the growth of India, to some extent the shift to Asia. Now, we've been till now as Asians very proud of that shift. I don't know how much thought we have given to what was happening at the other end of that shift. How did the Western world perceive that shift? So I think those are today issues that are staring us in the face, and the challenge for us, I think, is in many ways more radical than 2008, 2009, and I think again in India we shouldn't view it purely as a diplomatic challenge or even as a government challenge. I think in many ways responding to the world today is a national challenge in which certainly the economic stakeholders of India have a very important role to play.
Yeah. I mean, I think if we look at the current disruption, I mean, the principal agent of disruption, shall we say, is Mr. Trump, that through the last year, when he seemed a candidate, he was overwhelming far better known Republican candidates. There was a temptation in India, like the liberals in the West, to merely snigger at Mr. Trump, not take him seriously. And even today, I mean, I think, are we too much, involved in the US process to be objectively see Trump as a phenomenon, as a real consequence of real politics in the United States, and that his election will have consequences. Therefore, how do we begin analyzing Trump rather than taking positions whether it's good or bad? I mean, we don't have a vote in the US elections. We deal with who gets elected in the US.
I think that's a good point. I mean, starting point is what you said. Don't demonize Trump, analyze Trump. Because he is a reality. And again, we need to perhaps appreciate that there is a thought process which Trump represents. I mean, it is not a caprice or a momentary sort of expression of feelings. I mean, if you actually, once you start analyzing what Trump is about, it's one example which, by the way, a lot of people, even in Washington, are looking at, was a paper which Wilbur Ross, who's the Commerce Secretary designate, and Peter Navarro, who heads the Foreign Trade Council in the White House, wrote. And it's a very, I think it was called the Trump Economic Platform, is my recollection. There's a very sort of detailed analysis about how, I mean, these are people basically looking out of the window, not liking what they see, and then doing the American thing. How did we get there and what can we do to fix it? I think that's the thought process that you see reflected in that paper. And essentially, it attacks the offshoring by American companies as a reason for the decline of the American economy. To some extent, it attributes it to bad trade negotiations, which is why they pick on NAFTA and WTO, to some extent TPP. I think some of it is also seen as over-regulation, sort of too much control issues. But there is a view, we could disagree with that view, but there is a sort of a strong view and policy prescriptions that come out of that view on how to fix America and how to fix the world. Now, it will have consequences for everybody, including us. Today, how to respond to those sets of policies, and a lot of, the interesting thing is India, if my memory serves me right, rates one mention in the context of some trade issue. But we are not seen as a sort of part of the problem. But because we are not seen as part of the problem doesn't mean we won't get affected. I mean, there will be downstream impacts of decisions which are made. Today, how to sort of engage, I mean, some of it would be sort of damage control, some of it would be risk mitigation, but some of it, I mean, there could be opportunities in it for us too, because I think in America, which looks at the world differently and tries to create new terms of engagement with the world, might actually offer us possibilities which a more orthodox America might have been timid about doing.
I think taking this issue further, I mean, I think they're essentially, if you boil down Mr. Trump's policies, there are essentially three aspects. I mean, I think one, the American borders are going to be less open, from open borders to not closed ones, but certainly more regulated borders. Second, I think from free trade to fair trade. Third, that the allies must do more. American allies and friends must do more in the security domain. So in all the three, while we've not been in the shall we say, in the firing line in the US, the steps that the administration will take in these three areas on who will admit into its borders, what would be the nature of its trading arrangements, and how it's going to deal with security, the global security, all three will affect us in some form or the other. Are we beginning to think of how to respond to the three challenges?
Well, yes, but again, before I come to that, let me make one point, which is what we are seeing is actually the entire international system under stress. And when you are under stress, people do fall back to basics. And the basics, in a sense, today, for most polities, are jobs and security. I mean, if you look at almost every major pronouncement which is today made in the politics of every major country, it actually boils down to jobs and security. Now, in our case, I think on the security side, we are a very, we've got a lot going for us. We are seen as a very credible partner for the US. The American experience with us has been very positive in the last few years. The general sense has been that this relationship has grown. I think when General Mattis called up Raksha Mantri, that positive appreciation was clearly expressed. I think on the job side, what is important is we need to differentiate our services and trade with the US from their problem of offshoring. We are not part of the offshoring problem. I mean, American companies don't come to India to escape their taxes. I mean, they go to a few other countries there. Our issue today is, I think, what is loosely called outsourcing. I mean, we have to somehow get across the message to the United States that outsourcing helps you be competitive. Offshoring damages your tax base. I think if we can distinguish ourselves from the basic problem which Trump is attacking, my sense is we would be very differently perceived, and that's the challenge before us.
Yeah. On the question of where the one consequence of Mr. Trump has been, the West has never been so divided as it is today. Open public disagreement between Western leaders. Canada, because the Canadian PM is in the US right now, saying I'll take more refugees the moment Mr. Trump says I won't, and the kind of to and fro between Berlin and Washington. We've never seen this kind of situation before. And part of the problem seems also how do you deal with Russia? That a divided West arguing over Russia, which they had historically agreed as a threat, how do we cope with these two important developments that are taking place?
Well, the nearest that we have seen, which would probably still be a pale shadow of what we are seeing today, was probably during George Bush 43, when on the Iraq war, when people like Schroeder and Chirac pulled in a different direction. I think today the fissures are much deeper, in many ways the fissures within the American polity are also expressing themselves in the larger Western camp. But what it does tell us is that the direction in which the international order is moving, and the homogeneity, the sort of the sense of unity which the Western camp, in a sense, even the NATO camp had, I think that has been eroding over a period of time. We are, I mean, for many years, we have advocated multipolarity. We have almost longed for multipolarity. I think we are approaching that moment of multipolarity. And we are looking at an international order where, in a sense, a lot of the fixed relationships, the assumptions, can no longer be taken for granted. I think, I won't say everybody is in it by themselves, but clearly there's a loosening up. I think a lot of major powers will tend to be more national rather than collective in their approach. And I would say, frankly, for a country like India, in the medium term, that's not such a bad thing. I think, in a sense, international politics where everybody is playing everybody offers you a lot of more possibilities.
Yeah. I think for a whole generations in India, since independence, have grown by pointing to the dangers of the Western domination. But if you're looking at the West, having problems, beginning to weaken within itself, and the rise of non-Western power like China, which in many ways actually you were drawing closer to China to deal with the Western power in the name of creating a multipolar structure. But what we've seen happen was actually the rise of China and the prospects of emergence of a unipolar Asia. But now, the renewed conflict between US and China, the whole framework of how do we deal with major powers, and especially in Asia, between China and the US, has become the central issue, hasn't it?
Yes, I think, again, I made a reference to the 2008-9 period. I think after the 2008 crisis and the very sharp sense of China's political strategic emergence in the world order, there was a temptation even among Indians to sort of think that somewhere this is a new bipolar sort of construct which has come. In fact, there was a school of thought that the way we tried to create space between Soviet Union and the US, we should similarly try between China and the US. I mean, of course, China is not the Soviet Union, so that was, in my view, the flaw of that construct. But the fact is, the rise of China was only portended, in a sense, what is happening now, which is further changes in the international order, a tendency on the part of the West itself to look at its global commitments and then fall back on that basics of job and security. If you see a lot of the changing sentiment in Europe, for example, and we heard yesterday from the former Prime Minister of Belgium, is the impact of migration on Europe, how it has actually changed their mindset. Trump himself, in a way, speaks of it when he talks about the wall. So it's partly social, it's partly political, it's partly security, but the fact is, the sort of the broad trend in the world today is of much more, I would say, national perspectives. Again, we are not in a bad position at all. I mean, if you look at it, our relations with the US, I mean, if we can stabilize any economic or business consequences of Trump's coming in, and with the Europeans, we are on a good wicket. With the Russians are, again, for us, actually an improvement in US-Russia relations is actually good for us, because as a country, we have had good relations with both of them, and their division sometimes puts pressures on us, which frankly we'd rather not have. So, and again, Japan's been a very good account. So if I look at it all, I would say if there's one relationship we need to work on more, it's probably the China one. I think If I look around the world and say, how do I get into the best possible position, which means I must have the most productive relationship with the major players. I think the China account is the one where probably we need to invest more energy and effort.
In fact, you served in China as ambassador for 4 years, and much of our expectation that somehow our bilateral differences can be kept aside, can be managed by expanding economic cooperation, by working in the multilateral arena. But we now find many of Trump's problems with China are also very similar to our problems. An expanding trade deficit, an increasing inflexibility of China when it comes to your border, and on multilateral issues like the nuclear suppliers group or other places. So in a sense, actually, the dramatic expansion of the gap between China and India has even limited the possibilities for really multilateral cooperation or of keeping something going with them.
Well, look, I can give you the glass full part of that explanation, because if I did not have a broader relationship with China, I wouldn't have some of the arguments I'm having today. It's because today I aspire to something bigger, like, say, the nuclear security, nuclear suppliers group membership, that we have that issue. If it is because today I have a stronger position on terrorism and I'm taking it into the United Nations forums and trying to sort of mobilize world opinion, that I have a difference out there. So I don't, it's not like our relation, we had less arguments, so the relationship was better than, I think it's natural as the Chinese grow, as we grow, there will be issues where things, work for both of us. There will be issues where they don't. And where they don't, I don't believe ducking the issue is the answer, to dealing with China. I think if there are issues, it's good to put them on the table and have an honest conversation.
I mean, one bright spot, at this point, when you look towards Asia, when the uncertainty about China, China's rise, and then the doubts about the American persistence in the region, has been a more assertive Japanese policy and a more greater warmth between Japan and India that has developed in the last few years. Does Japan become a critical anchor both for your modernization of your infrastructure, expansion of your international engagement, and is that going to be a linchpin of your strategy as you deal with the global uncertainties that the conference is focused on?
Well, before we come to Japan, I know there's a lot of talk about the uncertainties of American posture and withdrawal. But if you look at what is happening on the ground and even the considered policy statements, I'm not sure the Trump administration is actually preparing to withdraw from, certainly from Asia. In fact, the little that we can see from Mattis's visit to Korea and Japan and Abe's visit to the US is actually a sort of a strengthening of the bonds, but on different terms. I think the key to Trump is not advance or retreat. I think it is new terms of business. We may get the old policy, we may even get more than the old policy, but on different terms. In where Japan itself is concerned, look, I think Japan has a role, possibly a big role. In the past, our own view of Japan, and I've served in Japan, has been relatively narrow. A lot of work has gone, including by ambassadors like H.K. Singh, who's sitting in front of me, in broadening out that relationship, in changing Indian thinking about Japan and Japanese thinking of India. Today, my sense is that we see each other more strategically, meaning that the Japanese, for example, do accept that a bigger Indian economy is in Japanese strategic interest. We are seeing much larger Japanese commitments, both business commitments and ODA commitments. You already have the Delhi-Mumbai Industrial Corridor. You have initiatives like this Chennai-Bengaluru Corridor, the Japan Industrial Townships, a much bigger, the bullet train project. But I am not sure from there I would go as far as you are going. Because we don't know where, how ready, how much is really Japan prepared to do in terms of international security issues. I think that is still work in progress, and we have to see where that goes. So I would still say that strategic economics, geoeconomics would be more important with Japan than perhaps geopolitics at this time.
Yeah. So you already see some signs of expanding India-Japan cooperation
Yes, sure.
in the region, not merely inside India, but can we work more in the subcontinent as we look towards developing regional cooperation? Because your government has talked a lot about neighborhood first and the importance of devoting more resources to, not merely on the political side, but on the economic, on the geoeconomic side.
Well, I think there is today an evolution of Indian thinking on the neighborhood, which is that we cannot expect that the neighborhood countries be denied developmental choices. They will do, they will do whatever is the best for themselves. And when they look for international partners, which they have every right to do, it's better that we have a set of partners with whom we are also comfortable working. So a lot of the neighborhood sort of choices, in a way, are really reflective of the larger sort of geopolitics, which is playing out in our neighborhood. And who works with whom, I think, is partly going to be an outcome. It's still very much sort of, it's early days, because essentially the bulk of what we do, and frankly what everybody else does in our neighborhood, is still very bilateral.
So is there, you construct, because now with the SARC going nowhere, I mean, is there a way of looking at sub-regional cooperation? You already had the BIMSTEC leaders come to the BRICS summit in Goa. Is that going to be an important feature? I mean, how do we move wherever there is an opportunity, rather than getting stuck formulaically with the SARC itself?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think, I wouldn't say we've given up on SARC. We can't and we shouldn't. But the fact is that if, there are fundamental obstacles with proceeding down the path of regional cooperation, particularly issues like connectivity and trade, which is really what regional cooperation is about. If you can't get into a bus, then you find a train, or you can't get into a train, you find a scooter. So you find some vehicle which takes you forward. So today we are, because the SARC itself got stuck, we look partly at BIBIN, Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Nepal. Then we are now exploring BIMSTEC. I think we have every expectation this year that there'll be a ramp up of BIMSTEC. We're also looking at very loose, bilateral, trilateral, multilateral arrangements. I think the Indian system today is much more focused on finding an outcome than being fixated about what is the mechanism which gets you there. I think that openness, I would say, is a change for the good in our own system.
So what you're saying is the product is more important than the process, that we need to focus on what we interested.
Or at least get the balance.
Yeah. But the one, because no conversation of Indian foreign policy is complete without mention of our cousins, Pakistan, we've had this government started with great expectations. We've gone through some difficulties, and because one of our main problems has been the US relationship with Pakistan, and the question of terrorism, all this get lumped up in the relationship with Pakistan. Where do you see this going? I mean, in terms of the change in Washington, and some signs of at least, some indications maybe Pakistan will rethink its strategy. Given this, I mean, what is the thinking in Delhi at this point on Pakistan and Pakistan's relationship with the US?
Well, I think I would sum up the thinking in a way as, the thinking on Pakistan is necessarily security-centric. Because the fact is, we can live with a situation of very little trade. But we can't live with a situation of the terrorism tap being turned on and off, which it will be so long as the factory keeps running. So the issue boils down really to whether the Pakistanis are willing to, make a fundamental break with habits which they have practiced for so many years. Now, it is, in the past, it was seen as our problem because it was largely us and to some extent Afghanistan which were affected. I think in the neighborhood itself, there is today a recognition that it's a broader problem. So there are other countries willing to do that. But more than that, I think some of the Western countries may not be so open about what they say. But, in the government, our sense of dealing with them is that there is today international concern about the fact that a lot of the terrorist incidents which happen get traced back to Pakistan. Now, which part of the polity is a different subject. But the fact that you have administration in power which has put so much emphasis on security and in fact is justifying a lot of their early measures in the name of security, I think I would imagine that their assessment of the threat here should be fairly predictable.
I just want to ask you one question before we open it up for the questions from the floor. I mean, on the multilateralism question, both political and economic, there was a period when India was the most idealist champion of multilateralism of the United Nations. And then came the period where we were the Mr. Niyat in all the international bodies. I mean, that we became the active opponent of what was being done. But in the last 3 years, we've seen under this government, essentially we saw India moving from part of the problem on the climate change mitigation to one of actually coming up with innovative ideas of resolving the issue. So on one critical issue, at least, India has become one that is trying to find new ways of organizing multilateralism. And similarly, on the political side, I mean, where now when Mr. Trump says, look, UN is a talking shop, we don't really need these multilateral institutions, that where do we stand on multilateral issues? Or is there here where China is going to take over from the United States, talking about, China and Davos, we saw President Xi Jinping. So what are our prospects in multilateralism? Can we come up with a strategy that retains our essential core of India's interest in a multilateral world without being too doctrinaire about it, and whether we can demonstrate leadership?
Well, I think if we are to be multilateral, and I believe we should be, the first issue to settle is you are multilateral not because you want to be a good guy, but because it serves your interest. I mean, you may also be a good guy. That's a sort of bonus. The fact is, we need today to make people understand that multilateralism is not idealism alone. There is a sense of realism about how you engage the world. That when we went into Paris and helped to reach that agreement, it was done because we had made our own assessment of the threat that climate change posed to a society like India, and believed that under the circumstances, that was the best agreement you could get, and it met our bottom lines. We are going to be confronted with that situation on a whole lot of other issues. In fact, even last year, it wasn't, or the year before, it wasn't just Paris. I mean, it was also, say, something like the SDGs, or even peacekeeping operations. So these are issues where we have stakes, but where we are in a position to make a difference, make a contribution, find a solution. I think it improves your branding for sure, but it also advances your interest. And I would be, at a time when the horizons of a lot of other major countries are getting narrower, in my view, I mean, if I were to look at it like a market, if the majors are pulling back, there's a space out there. Now, is it in our interest to use that space? Do we have the capability of using that space? Will the space give us the return on investments we make? Possibly. So I would actually argue that in the coming years, we should be looking for a more forward position in international forums, become, because, anybody can make a good speech. The question is, the world will test you out on whether your behavior matches what you say. It also is not just a matter of diplomacy. I think if we are to carry credibility, say, with Africans, we need to be doing more economically in Africa. If we today say that we have a larger responsibility, when things go wrong, you have to, as we did in Yemen or Nepal or Fiji or Sri Lanka, you need to go and do something in that situation to actually show that you can live up to what you are professing. So, in my view, it would be good to do more, but to do that much more, we need also to commit more resources and capabilities on the ground.
Thank you. I think we're running out of time. The Foreign Secretary has to go back to Delhi. So there, Elvira, can you read out the questions, maybe one after one?
Thank you. We've got a question from the audience first, if we may, for the Foreign Secretary, from Harendra Sanjirana of the Indo-Nordic Strategic Association. It's related to the European Union, and the question is around trade, free trade agreements. What do you see ahead in that respect, given the situation for the EU at the moment, the context of Brexit?
Well, my understanding, in our division of work, the lead ministry for this is not Foreign Ministry, but the Commerce Ministry. But my understanding is that there is still strong interest in concluding a free trade agreement with the EU. But it's not an easy exercise, partly because multiple players, many special interests, which need to be harmonized between them. And also, I think probably a better balance between our priorities and European priorities. And a lot of Indian priorities are actually in trade and services. So you can't, a free trade which doesn't give due weightage to trade and services is not going to be good for India. So I think getting that balance right is what the negotiation is about.
Thank you. Another question from an audience member is from Rahul Mazumdar from the Exim Bank, who's simply put, Iran, question mark.
I can put an exclamation mark. But we do, look, things have changed a lot in Iran, between Iran and the world, and between us and Iran. Today, Iran is among the top energy suppliers for India. We are in the middle of a lot of conversations. Some of them are better known, like Chabahar and the Afghan connectivity project. But apart from Afghanistan, in fact, Iran has a larger connectivity significance because it's the pathway for the international north-south transit corridor. And we do see them as a significant political player in that region. So we will certainly keep our relationship with Iran going. And of course, while assessing what the overall international situation is.
Before we go to maybe another question, I mean, since we are sitting in Bombay, looking outwards, you see the Gulf has always loomed large here, the historic links between the Bombay presidency, the region, the trading links. While the question was on Iran, there is a lot going on between India and the Gulf states these days. And the Gulf still remains economically one of the most important partners. The Prime Minister was there in UAE last year. We hosted the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi. Could you tell us something about India and the Gulf, and the Arab Gulf here in that sense?
I think if you see the last 2 years, one big initiative has been towards the Gulf. The brief explanation I would give you is, in the early 90s, when we opened up, the first set of reforms which took place. In many ways, ASEAN countries were our natural partners because they had both the requirements and the experience which we needed as we opened up the economy. I think today, when we are looking, we are placed very differently. And when we look, whether it's in terms of energy cooperation, whether it's in terms of business partnerships, because Gulf countries also today want to diversify their exposure to the international economy. And if you consider the fact that we have 7 million plus Indians, bear in mind that the remittances that we get from the Gulf are roughly of the order of our IT exports to the United States. So given the stake that we have there, I think the thinking is that we need to step forward and build much stronger political ties. So there is a very concerted push towards the Gulf, and I think it's actually yielded us very good results in a very short time.
Is that last one?
Another question from KN Vaidyanathan of Mahindra Group. You've touched on this briefly with the question with the EU, but to elaborate, in terms of coordination for India's foreign relations between different ministries, commerce, finance, defense, external affairs, what's your outlook there? How do you feel that that this is progressing? What's your view on progressing India's relations and interests with that collaboration working?
If your question, as I understood it, yes.
Since I raised the question.
Yes.
Even the United States, for example, has a Department of State ground where all the different arms of the government come together in dealing with another country. However, we tend to deal more at a ministry to ministry level, not pull the weight of different ministries in dealing in multilateral forums.
Yeah. No, I got that. That was how I understood the question as well. I think that's partly true, but perhaps not fully. Because today, if I were to sort of within the government sort of share with you what are the what is the working style, I think there is a very much greater emphasis actually on that integration. That don't do the silos bit. Now, the US being what the US is, a lot of these are clearly structured. You have something like the deputies committees, or you have a cabinet level committee, or the deputies at various levels. You have a Wednesday meeting. It's all very well structured. I think the Indian way tends to be more informal. But if you were to ask me today, am I in sync with the Defense Secretary, Commerce Secretary, Home Secretary, Finance Secretary? How often do I talk to them? How often do we work together? I would say it's almost for us a daily rub, and also I think we do have, depending on sort of the nature of the issue, to some extent, authorities higher than us with a very strong sense of oversight, and who have shall I say, who are known for a degree of rigor and diligence in terms of enforcing that oversight.
I think we've really run out of time and the Foreign Secretary has to catch a flight. So ladies and gentlemen, you'll agree with me, the Foreign Secretary has been very frank and open and insightful in responding to the questions. And you'll also understand why he has this formidable reputation as a diplomat. So please join me in thanking the Foreign Secretary.